Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dream Leapers. I'm your host, Harriette Cole, and we have a very special guest this week. I'm really excited. We are honored to welcome an internationally acclaimed multidisciplinary creator and award-winning artist whose work challenges all of us to rethink history, culture, and identity. His name is Sanford Biggers. Working across sculpture, painting, textiles, music, and performance, Sanford has built a career rooted in transforming historical narratives into powerful contemporary expressions. His signature use of antique quilts and found materials invites audiences to see the past not as something that is fixed, but more as something that we can reinterpret and reimagine. A recipient of the Heinz Award for the Arts, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Rome Prize in Visual Arts from the American Academy in Rome, among many, many, many other honors, is a very long list. Sanford's work has been exhibited at leading institutions around the world, including the Studio Museum in Harlem, where he was an artist in residence, I think it was, early on, MoMA, and the Whitney. In this conversation, Sanford will tell us all about the intersection of art and history, his role in storytelling and shaping cultural memory, and how he continues to push boundaries across disciplines. Please join me in welcoming Sanford Biggers to Dream Leapers. So, welcome, Sanford. I'm so excited to have you here today. And, my show is called Dream Leapers. What we do is to talk to people who are manifesting their dreams. And wow, does it seem like you have been manifesting yours? So I actually want to go back because you're from California. Are you from Baldwin Hills area?
I am. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, my sister lived there for 30 years.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So you come from this really wonderful Black community of creative business people, all these folks who really support people's dreams. I mean, I know that has been true. For you as a little kid, when did you know little Sanford wants to be an artist?
I think a few things were happening. I think when I was in elementary school, going into middle school, I was just really most obsessed with the art classes. That was the period of time that would capture all of my focus and attention. And, I'd stay late. If I could stay late, they'd have to kick me out of the room, basically. And I think the next pivotal moment was probably when I first saw the movie Wild Style, which was, of course, depicting early rap, hip hop culture. And I saw that in the theaters when it came to LA. And that was the moment when I saw creativity in various forms between rapping and the DJing and MCing and breakdancing and graffiti. It was sort of like a whole cultural emergence, sort of a visionary culture coming around. And I think those two things just really influenced me a lot to figure out how to make things and create things and bring ideas to life.
And you made things on the sides of walls. You did some graffiti in your early days, didn't you?
I did. That's sort of where I started. I think, when I felt that once again, the culture was sort of outside, it wasn't inside.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a bunch of friends of me just got into how to try to communicate through that language. There was something about it that drew us to it.
So, I think of hip hop and the emergence, and you were there as a young kid as hip hop is just blossoming like crazy, and it becomes this global culture that we're still in right now. But I also think of parents. What did your parents have to say about you wanted to be an artist because you had professional parents, and you painting on the sides of walls?
Well, needless to say, they weren't happy about the second part there.
I bet.
But, outside of that, they were very, let's say, they looked positively on me doing, making artwork, painting, drawing. They were encouraging to my sister and brother, too, because they both had creative outlets through music and through ballet. So me being the youngest, when I started to get really into the visual arts, they were okay with that. Of course, doing it on the side of the buildings was not really in the purview. But once we got past that and I got put into AP art classes, they were supportive of it. It wasn't really a conscious decision where I said, I'm going to be an artist. It was just something that I found very early, and doors started to open up. I was entered into art contests when I was a kid in Los Angeles and did very well. Um, and to the point where I would win a competition, be able to compete nationally and have to travel to different states to show artworks. And this was happening in my late teen years.
Wow.
So,
It's exciting because, that's what we hear, those stories about kids who are athletes, or, like, and the parents have to go on this trip with them to where and where. So this was happening for you as an artist. What kind of work were you making?
I was doing portraits at that time. Basically, I was doing oil painting portraits of either members of my family or um, old album covers, painting Miles Davis or John Coltrane or Ella Fitzgerald. So I would think things that come sort of from the Black romantic genre of art.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so there's that part, which is the Black romantic, the history, right, of our culture. And then you were fully immersed in this new history that's being created, because hip hop was new and exciting and breaking the rules. How did that translate into your work? Because there was a lot of rule breaking and reimagining of what is and what can be.
Well, I think I think it gave me the perspective that as important and valuable as the past was and the recognition of the people who shaped our culture in many ways, I was painting more than just musicians and artists, but, doctors and civil rights leaders, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King type of thing. It was a way of communicating and passing on the legacy and the history, things that weren't necessarily being taught in our schools, but were conversations that we were having in my home and my neighbors' homes and in our community. So sharing that was a way of an access point for people who didn't know that information and were not getting it from school. And then the hip hop influence is exactly that. It's the future. It's like, okay, what is the trajectory of parts of that culture? This is a very new culture that is not, removed from that other history by many years. So
Right.
it's sort of a longer trajectory of where that influence goes.
So I'm curious, in your classes, when you're doing Malcolm X, and I mean, even more Malcolm than Martin, because Malcolm was and is this hot button figure, did you ever get pushback? Like, why are you doing those people as opposed to whoever the white classic icons might be?
Well, interestingly enough, I didn't get much pushback painting those icons, largely because I think the dialogue had closed down enough where the teachers weren't necessarily looking at Malcolm X and Martin Luther King as part of the current conversation in the early 80s. You know what I mean?
Right.
That they weren't tapped into that. So it didn't rub them one way or the other. What
Huh.
they did point out was, when that I got that assignment one day to paint members of your family, paint your neighbors. This was the same assignment given to my whole diverse class of people from all over the world, basically.
Right.
And everyone came home with came back to school with their various portraits that they did. Mine just happened to all be Black.
Right.
And the teacher pointed that out. I was like, wait, so why is everyone Black? And I was like, wasn't the assignment just to paint your, family and your neighbors? I'm like, these are my family and my neighbors. And it
Right.
was, a light bulb moment. I was like, you thought there was only one monoculture here. You didn't realize that all this other stuff is happening, or you didn't account for it. Somehow it stood out.
Well, and I know I've heard folks say to you that you had the kind of Huxtable upbringing, as did I. My father was a judge, and I'm from Baltimore. Your father was a neurosurgeon, right?
Hmm.
I know people didn't believe that was true.
Yeah, yeah. It
They're
was.
like, "What? You lying, boy?"
Well, that was at a time when that part of that strata of Black culture was invisible.
Yeah, and
Yeah, it was only the
honestly,
extremes that would be, the
honestly,
media
it's
only picks up
still
extremes.
it's still somewhat invisible,
It is still super invisible.
and very intentionally being wiped out in some ways. But and you address a lot of that in your work. But just, it's still staying in the early years. You decided to go to Morehouse, and rather than going to art school. And Morehouse means so much to Black culture, especially to Black men. There's the thing called the Morehouse man, and I mean, I can tell when I meet men who went to Morehouse,
Hmm.
there's a certain understanding of how to move through space, how to be in the world, how to be a representative of our culture and a futurist. It's a signature. What did Morehouse mean to you in terms of your development as a young man?
Well, I think, the timing was sort of very ripe to make the decision to go to Morehouse versus an art school or a non-Black college or university, because this would have been the late 80s for me. And Spike Lee had already put out a few films that was also, once again, showing the invisible
Right.
side of Black culture. I mean, the big deal about his films was the fact that they even got made and put out. Beyond the fact that they
That's
were
true.
good, but the fact that this was, a whole new vision, a whole new
Yep.
glimpse into a culture, right? And he is a Morehouse grad.
Yep.
So that was sort of in the air at that time. My brother and sister, who are older than me, went to, different colleges. They went to Berkeley and Harvard. So that
Right.
experience was sort of in a potential trajectory, but my parents had to they, had no choice but to go to Black universities and colleges. There
Mm,
was no other option. And a group of my age group at that time sort of thought like, well, it was great for our parents. Our parents look at how we're moving through society right now.
right.
Good enough for them, good enough for us. A bunch of us just turned our backs on the other schools and went to HBCUs.
And what would be key learnings that you have taken with you from Morehouse?
There are They're myriad. There's so
Yeah.
many. I mean, to your point earlier, Morehouse itself is a culture.
Yeah.
And one anecdote that just sticks out immediately is because I was having this conversation with a friend 2 days ago, was that basically in our first week, we are taught the mentality that you are not a success if you haven't looked behind or looked near you and found somebody else to bring with you.
Hmm.
If by yourself are a success alone, then you are not truly a success. So there was a mentality that you have to sort of take care of each other, look out for each other, share the wealth, network, and create community and advance.
That's beautiful. And I mean, it is apparent for to me, and I'm sure many people. You had a wonderful experience going to Japan as a young man that really has impacted your your practice, your artistic practice. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. This would have been soon after I graduated from Morehouse. I should preface this by saying my junior year at Morehouse, I did a year abroad in Florence, Italy.
Ah.
And at that time, there wasn't an abroad program at Morehouse,
Hmm.
but I was advised by my sister and my brother, who once again had already gone through college and they've seen how it's done. They were like, there's schools you can cross-register through to go to abroad programs. So I ended up being connected to the Syracuse University Department of Programs Abroad um, department, and I was able to cross-register and go to Florence to study art, to study painting, to study
Fantastic.
photography, Italian, and printmaking.
Wow.
So I got the bug basically from that junior year of being abroad. And when I finished school, uh, graduated from Morehouse, I moved to Japan for 3 years to co-teach English in Japanese junior high schools and high schools.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so Florence, I understand. I mean, this is the center for a center, anyhow, for artistic expression for millennia, right? Why Japan? How did that come to be of interest to you?
When I was in Italy, I had, these Euro passes. I'm sure you probably remember the
Sure,
Euro
of
pass.
course.
You pay this, you get this ticket that would give you unlimited travel within some parameters throughout Europe. So I had one of those tickets and traveled to France and the Netherlands and Germany. And, I did a lot of sightseeing
Sure.
in that year abroad, travels with friends that I met on my program. And I felt at the end of that year that, like, that was just the beginning. There was so much more of the world to see. And another student at Morehouse with me did his year in Tokyo. And when we got back together at Morehouse and we're exchanging stories, it sounded fascinating. So I wanted to find an opportunity to go there. And I applied for this teaching position through the JET program, which is an exchange program between the US and the Japanese Ministry of Education, and a few other English speaking countries. But that basically placed me in Japan with a family and a salary and a job.
Nice.
So I did that for 3 years.
That's amazing. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers. I'm here with Sanford Biggers, who is telling us his amazing story. Right now, we are in Japan. So Sanford, you're teaching English. Had you studied Japanese at all? Like, what was that like? You're a young person, so we learn more quickly than I guess. But Japanese is a totally different language. What was that like to immerse yourself in that culture?
Well, again, I was young, so I was fearless.
Yes.
I didn't take any Japanese prior to going. In fact, it was considered an asset for this job for me not to speak
Huh.
Japanese
Because you were
because
teaching English.
because we were teaching. So the more English we spoke, even the small talk was vital for, the students to practice. So we couldn't rely on the crutch of being able to speak Japanese. But I took a class at the YWCA when I was there, a couple of times a month, basically,
There
and
was a
learned some basic.
YWCA in Japan?
Oh yeah, of course.
Wow.
Yeah, they're everywhere,
Wow. I didn't know
everywhere.
that. Wow.
YMCA, YWCA, well, a lot of countries. So I took a course there after my job a couple of times a week, and then would immediately go out to, restaurant or to a bar and hang out and meet people because you find that there's a whole strata of society there that are also looking to meet non-Japanese people. They're like
Sure.
international cities. Let's go meet some people, young people who are open-minded. So ended up meeting lots of friends that way and us helping each other to speak English or Japanese.
And so, one of the things that people certainly now know in America about Japan, uh, the spiritual component, Buddhism is very important there. I mean, there are all these incredible structures, and just this immersion in peace and in actions that invoke peace. And you were able to step into that space and really study. Can you describe how that came to be and what you learned?
As the longer I was there, I started to meet more friends who would invite me, to spend time with their families or, we had a friend group. So I was probably, of the different friend groups I had, there were several where I was the only foreigner. And the better my language abilities got, that sort of opened up more and more. But again, there was an exchange, so a lot of them wanted to talk, practice English, or they wanted to learn more about things that were happening in the U.S. But they also afforded me opportunities to go to places where a lot of tourists were, or even expats were not necessarily going, and it could be as basic as going to somebody's winter house
Mm.
where they go skiing and saying, "Oh, this is the Japanese countryside, and this is how this whole culture is," all the way to going to a picnic during Sakura session, cherry blossom season, and there's a surprise concert that happens to be Sade in the middle of the spring with
Wow.
cherry blossoms popping up. So a lot of stuff that I might not have known, it wouldn't have been on my radar had I not been there.
Because you were immersed in the families, like in the actual
Hmm.
life.
Hmm.
And so you get to is it a monastery that you go to? What takes you into the spiritual space?
Near my apartment, there was a shrine,
Mm.
and sometimes I would just divert my route back home and go through it, and there usually would be incense burning, and of course, a sort of calm, sequestered spiritual moment that
Yeah.
people would go to, as they want to. There was no, scheduled programming or anything like that. You would just walk through, light an incense for a deceased ancestor, and pray to them very quickly, and listen to the bells, and move on your way. It's just sort of being very present and allowing that type of open space in your day to experience that consultation with the ancestors and so on. And that was right around the corner from the latest technology that you've ever seen, stuff that we still have not got in the US. And that was over 30 years ago.
My
So,
goodness.
yeah, so the integration of, extreme futurity and at the same time an obeisance to the past also influenced me. And I think that's one of the reasons they have a certain balance.
Yeah. And then did you observe people making the mandalas?
I saw that, but that wasn't that happened to be a Tibetan group that was
Ah,
visiting a Japanese museum and doing one of the live mandalas. So, that didn't necessarily come from from Japan itself, but an experience I had in Japan.
but
Hmm.
it was Tibetan monks who were making the mandalas.
Hmm.
Ah,
The
okay.
sand mandalas, yep. And they've come
So,
to the U.S. too. They do these tours at,
of course.
universities. Yeah, yeah, where they,
That
set up shop for a week or two and do these huge, elaborate sand mandalas, and people can observe and meditate and all of that. And then at the end, they sweep it up.
So yeah, let's talk about that because that has very much influenced your work. This, uh, like dance with the ephemeral, I guess, and you making your own version of what mandalas are.
Mhm.
I follow an Indian meditation practice, and they make the mandalas, and they're so uniform. That sense of pattern is beautiful, and they're making it all day long. And I've watched people make them, and then watch it get swept away, and like, oh, it's so
Mhm.
beautiful, and now it's gone. Um, Talk about what that has meant for you, and how you've incorporated it into your work.
Um, Again, I think that speaks to this existence in a sense of cosmic balance that, for all the hours it takes to render one of these sand mandalas or sand pieces, that it can be swept up in just a moment, and that most profound things are actually ephemeral. You experience them and then they're gone, and then you re-experience them through memory, which distorts and changes things, but the essence of it is a thing that still inspires the individual. So I started to look at ephemeral objects and the actual action of making them being more important than the final product. And then, although that quote unquote final product is what we all see and enjoy, but in fact, that's the middle stage of the cycle of creativity because back into the ether. So I found that to be a very poetic and profound recognition and way of handling presence, absence, death, life, birth, the whole cycle.
And then as you have been making them, and Fallon, my producer, if you would look through Sanford's slides, because we can pull up the mandalas. I love to look at those with him. You have brought your own sensibility, and kind of what I think feels like an infusion of African culture is what I see when I look at those pieces. Go to the mandalas. We'll go back to these, or you know what? I can do it because I know what I'm looking for. Okay, here we are, and this is at the Parish Museum right now in is that Southampton?
Is that Watermill or Bridge? I think it might be
Okay,
Bridge.
the Parish Museum is in the Hamptons,
Watermill, Watermill.
and Sanford has this beautiful show up right now through September. But can you describe this piece? And because it's got multiple things, it's got the mandala, but it also has uh, fabric and is this stone? What is this sculpture?
That's marble.
Marble, right? So what is this called, and what are the components?
Okay. Well, it's actually the combination of two pieces, but I'll set it up by mentioning the, you know, prominent aspect of this installation is a large sand mandala of sorts. It's not technically a mandala, it's actually a rendering of a patchwork quilt that I've made before. And I did start by making these sand pieces that were a little bit more reminiscent of what you would call a traditional mandala. And over the years, I've changed the graphics a bit to
Right.
incorporate, a continuity with my paintings and other works that I've been doing. But upon glancing it, you think it's just paint. Very
Or a
pristine,
rug.
or a rug, yeah, or even a rug. It's a very large floor piece. It's a square. It's around 20 feet by 20 feet and
Mhm.
has 5 or 6 different colors. There's pinks, there's violets and blues, and there's stripes and floral things. So it's actually quite intricate, and it's done on a very, very large scale. And it takes, close to around 300 hours to do something like that.
With how many people working with you?
Typically around 4 to 5.
Mhm.
But in this particular installation that's at the parish right now, in the middle of this sand piece is a 9 foot tall marble figure. And the marble is a beautiful pink color. It's actually a pink Portuguese marble that has a very beautiful, lush type of marbling through it. And the figure is basically the body of an object, a neoclassical sculpture. So basically, a woman standing with robes that looks like something you might find in Rome or Greece. But then you get up to the face, and the actual face is covered by an enlarged mask that is comprised of various African masks. So it feels very much like an African mask on top of a Greco-Roman figure.
Which is something that you've played with a lot. I remember going to a show a couple of years ago out here in the Hamptons, where I could see up close. I mean, you have these sculptures where one half of it looks like a European sculpture, and the other half looks like an African sculpture.
Hmm.
What is that dance, and what does that mean to you?
Well, it's a few things. It's I think first and foremost is playing with our notion of history and how objects and archetypes have been used to shape our understanding of the world, not just art history, but the world itself. There's a certain feeling that's evoked when you see a marble sculpture of a Greco-Roman man or woman. There's a certain feeling when you see a quote unquote African object, or a bust or a sculpture. They evoke certain histories, basically.
Mhm.
But that's also how we are taught that. The historiology of those
Right.
objects is made to for us to think and connect certain histories to those objects. So what I'm doing by these is actually compressing and combining that so that it disrupts this notion of hierarchy, beauty by European and Western standard, male, female, all these things start to collapse into an object that is somehow an alien or a monster, but they're very, very beautiful too. So they're
And so
very seductive.
I'm curious, Sanford, when you first started making those, what the reaction was, because I'm sure some people are like, how dare you mess with our sculptures?
Hmm.
This is ours. And even, when we know the history of the noses being cut off and all these different kinds of things,
Hmm.
but here you are coming in, kind of juxtaposing these concepts of beauty and history. What were the reactions like, especially early on? Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Sanford is gone. Pause. All right. So I'm looking here. Would this piece be considered part of that series?
Yes, I would.
What is
Mhm.
this piece called, and can you describe it?
Yes, that piece is called Lady Interbellum, and it's a sculpture. It's a famous sculpture of a crouching Venus figure who's sort of nude but crouching and covering part of herself while looking out. It's a classic. And for this specific one, I enlarged the scale and covered the face once again with a combination mask combined from different masks from different parts of Africa, to create a contrasting image basically to the body, but at the same time, it takes on a different persona. And this is what I found in working like this. So back to your question about how people
Mm.
have been responding
Yes.
to these works. Um, Interestingly enough, I think, and this is part of the experiment of doing them, is that once again, we're talking about archetypes. These are archetypes of Greco-Roman sculpture, archetypes of African sculpture, but none of them are quite realistic of the real object. There's something different happening. So they create a third type of being that actually is more than just a combination of European and African. It's really sort of pushes us to realize the relationships that even put those cultures together in the first place.
Mm.
And by extension, anything that could have happened in places like, let's say, Istanbul or Rome, throughout history, Egypt, places where many, many cultures came and they commingled for better or for worse. They've created complicated intersections of history and culture. And that's what these pieces are. The title itself, Lady Interbellum, is sort of a play on the phrase Lady Antebellum.
Right.
Anyone who knows a bit about pop culture could look that up, but there's an argument between a rock folk group and a performer, lady, both named Lady Antebellum at one point. But
Yes.
I'm looking at this as an interbellum. So what happens in between the wars, the various wars, the wars that never stop.
Mm.
This piece was made in 2020, but as it dips into history, it's also talking about the present and the future. Again, it's the archetype of the sculptures, but it's also the archetype of history and culture itself, how the pendulum constantly swings back and forth.
Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are speaking with Sanford Biggers, looking at his work. So for those of you who are listening, hope we're doing a good job of describing everything. And those of you who get to see, feast your eyes on this. So I want to go back because we have these wonderful images that you sent. So right now, this is from the beginning. This is when you were working. It's got the mandala feeling to it, but it's also a marriage of hip hop. So where are these, and can you describe what we see right here?
Sure. What we're looking at is basically an overhead camera angle shot of a huge dance floor. This one, again, is around 20 feet by 20 feet square, and it's carved um, rubber tiles that are carved and cut into shape so that they come together like a big puzzle that looks like a mandala. So a circular diagram. For those that don't know, a mandala is a circular diagram that has come from Buddhist history and culture as a map of the cosmos, a map of the psyche, and a way of depicting various gods and deities. So the floor itself is a combination of various circles. The colors are primarily sort of a reddish orange, a black, a green, and a pale beige type of color. These are made from hand cut pieces of rubber, and it's the same type of rubber tiling that is used to cover subways and buses. So it's something you've seen every day, but never combined and put into a format like this. And I mentioned this was an overhead view. It's an overhead view because we're looking at the view from a video camera pointing down on this circular diagram. And in the middle of that diagram are dancers, break dancers specifically, doing circular motions, windmills, and up rocks and different breakdancing moves that echo the circles that are on the mandala. And there's a crowd around this covering all four sides of the square, approximately 200 to 300 people of all ages, all backgrounds. And this took place in around 2000, 2001 in the Bronx at a breakdance competition.
And so you're bringing fine art with this historical base of the mandala to this new art form. This is early days of breakdancing. Well, this was a big moment for breakdancing. It was very big globally at this point. How did the dancers react to being able to perform on artwork?
Well, when I did the initial taping of the breakdancing competition, um, it was probably the third or fourth year of a global annual competition called the Battle of the Boroughs.
Right.
So many of these people had been to previous battles, so they somewhat knew what to expect. But this time they had this basically custom made dance floor, which was something they had not really had in the past. So the dancers were super excited because it elevated the experience and made it sort of this performance art experience to some degree. At that point, however, they did not realize that this was a quote unquote art piece. They just thought it was a custom dance floor for them to do their thing. But we kept in contact with the dancers. We let them know that it was being videotaped. Of course, you know, those that signed off signed off. And later, when I exhibited the floor itself became the sculpture. So I would take that from the initial place where the breakdancing competition was and then install it in institutions and museums throughout the world. And the thing that would sort of identify what had happened was the scuff marks that were left on
Mm.
the dance floor that showed all the dance steps and movements on the floor. And then, of course, the video documenting the entire experience from above. So it's not focusing on people, it's really focusing on the circles and the geometry within the circles and movements of the breakdancers itself.
So you, from early on, have worked in a multimedia sense, using video in particular to help tell stories. In the early days, what kind of equipment were you using?
Oh, wow. Wow. All right, you're about to carbon date us all with this.
Well, because 2000, I mean, that's a whole nother world.
Well, 2000 is another world, but the first videos I started doing were Super 8 film. So Super 8 film goes back to the 70s. So I have
Wow.
archival reels of family movies and old media, or what would we call it? Jurassic media, basically, Jurassic technologies. So in fact, in grad school, a friend of mine, Jennifer Zakin, still a good friend, a Jewish woman from Connecticut, me being from Los Angeles. We're having a conversation one day while she was editing a video of something she was doing. I was doing another video in another video bank at the Art Institute of Chicago in their video, classroom. And I'm like, I have all this Super 8 footage. And she had like, I have a ton of that stuff too. I was like, well, let's look at each other's and see if there's anything interesting. And we made a two-screen video project from that where we digitized all those Super 8 films and basically put our childhoods up next to each other. And it was shocking at how similar all of these our familial rituals and parties and lifestyles were like.
I
And again, I
watched
mean,
that. I
yeah,
watched that, Sanford, and it was absolutely fascinating. We had those Super 8 videos too.
mm,
And everybody's dressed alike. The ladies have on their Leave It to Beaver type dresses with the little
exactly.
belts, and the table is perfectly set, and the children
Hmm.
are. I mean, it. What was fascinating to me about how you two juxtaposed your stories, which is something that I see through your work, is you kind of show what's going on culturally without beating people over the head with it. It's like, okay, look, this is what's happening in culture. Here, we are not nearly as different as some people would like to believe. Uh, Even with going back to the marble sculptures that look like the Greco-Roman and then the African mask, well, they're right next to each other, but you're not screaming. Like your approach is
Right.
not screaming. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm an artist. I
Mhm.
make objects, I make experiences. I'm not a pundit, I'm not a writer.
Right.
Those are other people's forms. There are myriad ways for people to tell their stories. I do it visually, and by doing it visually, it gives me the opportunity and the privilege to not have to tie everything up in a specific bow. It's actually more important to elicit interest and investigation and to change the way people see the world around them, which is something that I personally felt is has always been much of the problem. It's very easy if you just pay attention to media that is fed to you to highlight difference and conflict. It's very easy. In fact, it gets views, it gets likes, it gets follows.
Mhm.
It's an easy narrative. It's not a difficult thing.
Mhm.
But to see past that and say, wait a second, this entire group of people is actually not just like that one example. And that is universal about every single culture out there. There's the good examples, the bad examples, and everything in between. What we need to do as people is be able to see beyond that and ascertain things from visual literacy, cultural literacy, historic literacy. And that's where I come in. I feel like artists have the ability to compress all of those things together and deliver it in a format and in venues and places where it is left up for interpretation. It's more to provoke a new way of seeing the world as opposed to telling people how to see it the way I see it.
Mhm. I especially like looking at those two videos, and you made a comment in something that I saw that really it's more about class than race, which is something that is a very touchy subject for people to talk about, but it's very real.
But it always has been.
Yes,
It's no more sensitive now than it was back then. Our
right.
means of communicating it are very different now.
Yeah.
Mm,
And I mean, even within the community, people are uncomfortable about talking about class.
absolutely.
It's easier in a way to point the finger at other people who don't look like you. And it's a fascinating discussion. Sometimes I'm change the subject now. Like, how have you responded when there've been outrageous things happening in the world? So when uh, after George Floyd was murdered, and as an artist, your approach has been different from some. But how have you reacted? Including, I remember seeing something you created some work naming it for so many of our fallen Black young men and women. What was that series, and how did you come to express what was going on inside of you through your art?
Well, somewhere in the mid 2010s, when we all started to get basically inundated by seeing videos of Black bodies, being attacked and brutalized, victimized, killed, murdered. And it became almost a daily occurrence for a while. And that phenomenon itself, as gut-wrenching as it was, it led me to want to react to it somehow. And I mean, I didn't know what it was going to be. It was just something I felt compelled to do, which is
Sure.
something I try to avoid sometimes because, you know, sometimes you need some distance to understand an event. But there was something so visceral and primal and predatorial about the way we were consuming that media that made me devise a project where I actually took African objects that I had in my own personal collection and start to manipulate and modify them, usually by putting tar and clay and different materials onto the actual sculpture, and then taking them to a shooting range and sculpting them with different caliber guns. So
Sculpting. That's an
using a,
interesting
yeah,
word. You were shooting them, were you not?
I was shooting them with different caliber weapons, but I looked at that as being a way of chiseling and, basically reducing material to create a form, which is how we would talk about it in a technical art manner. But yes, it was shooting it. So I was using basically the weapons of the quote unquote masters to sculpt these objects. And once the objects were shot, I would pick up all the remnants and then cast those in bronze and basically reanimate the object through a bronze sculpture. So they look very much like power objects, objects that we see in primordial cultures from, Southeast Asia, pre-Columbian African objects that we look at as reliquary and shrine type of objects. So now they have gone from being wood to being destroyed and now recomposed back into bronze objects. And each of those objects were named after specific victims. And after doing, somewhere near to, 12 or 15 different figures for different victims, it just occurred to me that I could end up doing that for the rest of my life. That's definitely not what I wanted to do. But the irony is that there's just no shortage of that being an act, part of our culture. And I did that, and it was important to use these objects that are associated as being sort of antique or old objects because the story is ancient, antique, and old. The brutalization of Black bodies has been happening on this continent alone for over 400 years. So
That's
these
right.
objects were speaking to that. And then I would show the video of, I would film all this with high-speed video, slow the video down so you could literally see the bullets piercing these
Right.
bodies and exploding them. And I would put those videos close to the objects in a room so that you have an individual seeing it, a moment of seeing it as a video, the way you might consume it on your phone, and then seeing
Right.
the actual object that was left behind.
It's very powerful. For you internally as you're making this, is it cathartic? Like what happens emotionally, spiritually for you?
Um, well, these ultimately end up being little memorials,
Mm,
that are commemorating victims and also serving as a reminder that this is not a new occurrence and that this has always been happening and it's something that everyone needs to sort of be paying attention to realize that that is a symptom, an aspect of our culture that needs to be rectified, obviously.
mhm.
Um, yeah.
Oh, I got you. Hey guys, this is Dream Leapers with Harriette Cole. We are talking with Sanford Biggers. Believe it or not, we have 5 minutes left. Can you imagine? So I'm going to pull back up some of these images, Sanford, and I'm going to go. Uh, let me tell you where I want to go, and then I'll come. I want to go here. So you've talked about making power images and this amazing statue in Rockefeller Center that you created. Uh, I mean, tell us what this is. Please describe this to us. And it's called Oracle, correct?
Yes. Okay, so what we're looking at now, Oracle is a 25-foot tall bronze sculpture. The body is the figure of Zeus sitting in his throne above Mount Olympus. And the head is, again, a combination of various African objects. And the piece is cast out of bronze and weighs approximately 7 tons. And the location that we're looking at is when it was installed in New York City in front of Rockefeller Plaza, and basically right in front of where the ice skating rink is, an iconic point of view of Midtown Manhattan and our city. And it was there for around 3 months in 2022 or 2021. And after it was in New York and went to the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles and was there at the corner of Wilshire and Westwood for approximately 2 years. And now it lives at the Dunham Estate, which is a vineyard in Sonoma, California.
Wow.
And it's a seated Zeus, and in one of the hands is a torch that also sort of is reminiscent of the torch held by the Statue of Liberty.
What was the reaction to this piece as it stood in Rockefeller Center Plaza?
Yeah, so obviously there was hundreds of thousands of eyes on this piece in
Yes,
person, but also online. So
yes,
the comments ranged from pride and interest and love to hate and
sure.
denigration and confusion, all the things. It was all the things. But I thought that the piece was important to place here because it essentially is positing a new part of mythology into Rockefeller Center, which already has images of Zeus and Apollo and
Yes,
Atlas and all these other Greek
all around. Yes.
all around. So this ends up being yet another deity within this larger pantheon there. And I think this is really an aspect that's similar in all of my works, whether we're talking about the small pieces from the BAM series where I shot the small sculptures to this monumental scale piece, all the way to the quilts and the paintings
Yeah,
that I do on
actually, that was
antique
what I was going
quilts.
to get to. So here's an
Mm,
example from the quilts because you work with found objects a lot. You reimagine things, bringing a lot of materials together. Quilting has been such a big part of American culture, of African American culture, especially in the South. I think of Gee's Bend, those
mm.
amazing women over many generations. You like the mandalas, you've taken quilting and made it yours. What is your process and why? Why was quilting important?
Well, I think you mentioned it earlier. These are power objects.
Mhm.
I started to consider power objects on a much more metaphorical level, not just the, you know, pre-Columbian African objects that we know, but the um, the cast-offs of culture, things that are old and considered something to throw away or something just used for comfort, but not high art, taking
Mhm.
those things because they really are the palimpsest of culture, and then transforming them into the artworks that I exhibit to something that is transformed, evocative of several different genres at once, but yet sort of defining its own path. And to me, in some way, the quilt is no different than the wooden or the marble or the stone objects. It's really the same process, different visual approach, but the same material and conceptual approach.
And I want to go to the clouds. And as you tell us about it, let's see, is it there? Here's some. Clouds are very important in your work and have been for a long time. And you have an exhibition at the Parish Museum, which I mentioned at the top, that is still open right now. And hopefully people can take a look at it. Clouds are important in that exhibition. What do clouds mean to you?
I think clouds come from my early upbringing doing graffiti. Doing clouds was one of the regular type of effects that you would put behind bubble letters or wild styled letters. You could do
Mhm.
clouds or shadows and arrows and all these different motifs that we sort of all tossed around at that time. So I think my interest in depicting clouds started then, but it was fortified by the time I got to Japan because of my interest in the mandalas and the tankas, because again, clouds are often used in mandalas to indicate the heavens and the otherworldly. And within my studying of Buddhism, it turns out that they even call recently inducted monks clouds, unsui in
Oh,
Japanese. They call them clouds. And they
wow.
are clouds because once they have sort of graduated to the level of being full, monk, they are then set off out into the world to travel unattached, able to change location, and to influence other people to adopt a life that is about non attachment and a type of karmic and spiritual fluidity.
That's beautiful. What a delight. I mean, we only got to touch on the surface because there's so much incredible work that you've done. But thank you for sharing a bit of your story with us. Your work is really fascinating, and people can see it at the Parish Museum in the Hamptons through the rest of this summer, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Is there anywhere else that people can find work? Because you usually have stuff going all over the place.
It's better for us to leave some links. I just got back from France where I have a show in Paris at the Esther Schipper Gallery, and some other works in at the Villa Lacoste in Provence. And there's works at several museums throughout the world, luckily.
Okay, we're going to list them. I'll get them from your team and we'll include them. Thank you so much, Sanford. It's been a real delight to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. And thank you to all of you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. For those who you could see the work, it is incredible. Hopefully we described it so that you could see it anyhow. Until next time, have a great day and make it count.